on the instrument. So you can control the amount of flow rate that you send into your leaf chamber. And you can see right now my chamber is open, so I actually don't have any flow going back to my sample analyzer. It's being completely exhausted out the chamber. So I'm going to go ahead and close my chamber. I'll invite you to do the same thing. Once you close the chamber, you should notice that that air is no longer being exhausted out the chamber, and it's now being diverted up and through the match valve to my sample analyzer. And there, we do have sensors on the exit ports for both the sample analyzer as well as the reference analyzer. And those sensors are measuring the flow rate. So these sensors, I should note, are not as precise as this main flow sensor. This main flow sensor is what is used when we calculate photosynthesis and transpiration. These other flow sensors are really just there as kind of a quality control for you. And to just check, basically, if you have a leak in your chamber, they're very useful for that, but they are not nearly as good of flow sensors as this main flow sensor. Okay, so the flow can be changed by simply tapping on that flow, the box next to the flow. And if you tap in that box, it'll bring up a number pad and it will allow you to type in a flow that you want. So if I clear that and type in 300, you'll notice that the number in the box changes and the real-time indicator will respond to that change in set point. And you should see it approaching very close to the flow rate that you've asked for. So what should you keep in mind when setting your flow rate? Well, flow really controls how much air is flushing through the leaf chamber, okay? So if you have a leaf that has a high photosynthesis rate, a high transpiration rate, then it's a good idea to use a fairly high flow rate because you want that chamber to be flushed quickly. If you're working with leaves that have really low photosynthesis rates or low transpiration rates, then you typically use lower flow rates. And in that way, you're flushing the chamber much slower. And what that does is it allows the leaf time to take up more CO2. So you're removing more CO2 from the airstream, and it allows the leaf time to add more water vapor to the airstream. And that way we will get a bigger difference between our sample and our reference analyzers. And remember that that difference between these analyzers is your photosynthesis rate and your transpiration rate. So the bigger the delta, the more confidence we will have in our measurements. So if you think about a sensor, every sensor has a signal to noise ratio. And so this instrument is no different. We want the biggest signal we can get, and that will improve our signal to noise ratio. So we always try to optimize that delta. And one of the ways we can optimize the delta is through adjusting our flow rate. So again, if you're at high photosynthesis, high transpiration, then you typically want high flow rates. If you're at low photosynthesis rates and low transpiration rates, then you want to use lower. I have the fluorometer chamber attached, and a typical flow rate, and you'll notice it defaulted to that flow rate. A good flow rate to start with the fluorometer chamber is about 500 micromoles per second. I would recommend starting at that flow rate. And once you have the rest of your environmental controls set, and you clamp onto your first leaf, you can take a look and see, is this a good flow rate to use? What is my delta CO2 and my delta H2O at this flow rate? If you have a fairly good delta, and a good delta CO2 is greater than 5 micromoles. So if your CO2 delta is greater than 5, I would not change my flow rate. I would just go with that flow rate. If you put your leaf in and your delta is less than 5, then I would think about lowering my flow rate. And the typical minimum flow rate that you want to use is around 150 micromoles per second. We want to make sure that we're getting at least 100 micromoles of flow through our sample analyzer. And that makes sure that we can flush our sample analyzer and we're getting a good measurement of the concentration that's in our leaf chamber. If you go below 100, you'll notice that the diagram will actually tell you that's not a good idea. So let's try that. Let's go ask for a flow rate of, let's say, 75. And you'll notice how that ratio of the flow split changes. And notice the red text that comes up on the diagram. So what this red text is doing is it's warning you that this is not a good idea. See how we're getting less than 100 micromoles per second of flow through our sample analyzer. So the instrument is trying to tell you that this flow rate is just not sufficient. And if you look up in your menu bar, you'll notice you're also getting a yellow warning symbol there. And it even tells you your flow sample is low. Now, it will allow you to use the instrument like this. So you may have a situation where you need to lower your flow rate as low as you can. And you may have a specific experiment or even a special chamber that you're using where you just have to do this. And so the instrument will allow you to log data like this. But I would really caution you, if you see red text on your diagrams at all, you should adjust your settings so that you're in a more appropriate flow rate. So for us, let's go ahead and increase our flow. Let's try to choose a flow rate of 150. Again, you'll notice how the flow split changes. And now notice how the text is yellow. So before, when we had a flow rate of 75, the text was red. Now with a flow rate of 150, the text is yellow. And that's indicating that it's something to be concerned with, but it's not as severe as the red warning. And you'll also notice you do not have a warning in your menu bar telling you your flow sample is too low. So again, I would view yellow text as a warning and red text as an error, do not proceed. Okay, so you can kind of think of the color of the text as an indicator. And blue really tells you everything's okay. You're in a good spot. So let's go ahead and increase our flow rate to 200. And at 200, it's still warning us. Notice how the text goes back to blue. Okay. So pay attention to your diagrams and think about what you're doing when you set your flow rate. For now, let's go ahead and go back to a flow rate of 500. Are there any questions about setting flow? Okay. One other item I should talk about on this screen is the overpressure valve. Currently, my overpressure valve is set to 0. What the overpressure valve does is it allows you to basically constrict the flow leaving the leaf chamber. And what that does is it provides a little bit of back pressure. And if you had some small leaks in your leaf chamber, it would actually force air to go out those leaks rather than into the system. It is really more important to be able to use this feature with other chambers. So we have a chamber that is a whole plant chamber, and it's kind of a variant of this chamber, but basically it allows you to put an entire pot or container into the chamber, and you can basically measure a small plant with it. And in that situation, you have oh, thank you, Elizabeth brought me the chamber example. So you can see in this example, you can actually open up the chamber, top comes off. I'll show you. And you can actually insert a container, a little growth container, either a small pot or a container into the chamber, and basically it will measure the exchange from that small canopy. This is really popular for people working with Arabidopsis and other plants like that. Some people working with turf grasses have also found this very useful. But in that situation, you have some exposed soil in the chamber. And we know that soil, it has microbial activity, and it produces a respiration rate. And so we can actually use this overpressure valve here on the screen to actually suppress that soil respiration, so it doesn't interfere with the canopy gas exchange that we're trying to measure. So that's probably the biggest reason for the overpressure valve. In normal operation, we don't really recommend you use it at all. I would leave it set at 0%. Okay, let's go on and talk about water. So for water vapor control, you can go ahead and turn it on. And currently my system is set at 60% relative humidity in my leaf chamber. And you notice that each of these gray squares are really buttons. So you can control your water vapor based on any one of these buttons. If rather than controlling on relative humidity in the leaf chamber, maybe you wanted to control based on the incoming water mole fraction, you could switch and tap the top of that rectangle, and you are now in water reference control mode. And you can see that the label on the set box changes based on which one of these you're controlling on, okay? So if you go back to RH air, you'll notice that that label changes and it should indicate what your current set point is.